Nancy Holbrook was the nurse everyone trusted, gentle hands, calm smile, and a reputation built on saving lives. But when her 10-year-old son Ethan died mysteriously in his sleep, detectives soon uncovered a horrifying secret. The woman who had spent her life healing others had been quietly killing the one person who trusted her most. Nancy Holbrook was the kind of woman everyone trusted. She wore her nurse uniform with quiet pride, her blonde hair tied neatly, her smile calm and reassuring. To the people of Willow Creek, she was the heartbeat of St. Mary's Hospital, the nurse who stayed long after her shift ended, the woman who held the hands of dying patients and comforted their families when no one else could. Her life, from the outside, looked picture perfect. She lived in a small but cozy home on Maple Street with her 10-year-old son, Ethan, who was known for his shy smile and thin, pale frame. Neighbors often saw them walking together to the park, Nancy's hand always resting protectively on his shoulder. But behind the warmth of that image was a house filled with the quiet hum of medical machines and the constant scent of disinfectant. Ethan was always sick, a mystery that baffled doctors. He'd suffer sudden bouts of fever, nosebleeds, and fainting spells that came and went without warning. Every time something happened, Nancy was there, perfectly composed, already knowing what to do. She'd rush him to the emergency room, carry him in her arms, and recite every detail of his symptoms with a nurse's precision. Doctors admired her dedication. They said she was the reason her son was still alive. Late at night, Nancy would sit by Ethan's bedside with a small journal in her lap, recording the day's episodes, his temperature, the color of his skin, how many minutes he slept, and how many times he coughed. She was meticulous, almost obsessed with every tiny change in his health. Sometimes she'd inject medicine into his Roman 4 at home, whispering that it was to help him rest. Ethan never questioned her. He trusted her completely. The sickness became part of their lives, something Nancy seemed to carry with both pride and pain. When Ethan couldn't go to school, she'd post heartfelt messages online, describing his struggles and her devotion as a mother. People admired her strength, calling her an angel in scrubs. Then, one cold winter night, Ethan didn't wake up. Nancy said she found him motionless in bed, his small hand still clutching his stuffed bear. The ambulance arrived too late. She told everyone his heart had simply stopped. At the funeral, she cried quietly, holding his picture close to her chest. The town mourned for her, the mother who had given everything for her sick child. No one questioned her grief. No one saw the strange calm behind her tears, and no one yet knew that Ethan's death wasn't an accident at all. It was the beginning of a horrifying truth. Detective Aaron Miles had worked dozens of tragic cases in Willow Creek, but something about Ethan Holbrook's death wouldn't leave his mind. The report said it was natural causes, that the boy's heart had failed in his sleep. Still, the details didn't sit right. The child was only 10, and the autopsy was inconclusive. A month after the funeral, as the town began to move on, a plain white envelope arrived on Miles's desk. Inside was a single note typed in block letters. Asterisk, check the nurse's medicine cabinet. Asterisk, there was no signature, no return address, the kind of message most officers would throw away. But Miles couldn't. He began looking into Nancy Holbrook's background. Her record was spotless, glowing performance reviews, no complaints, and a reputation for compassion. But Ethan's medical file told a different story. 14 hospital visits in 1 year, each for unexplained symptoms. The strange part was that the episodes always happened when Nancy was alone with him. When other nurses monitored Ethan, he seemed to improve. When Nancy took charge, he worsened. It was a pattern impossible to ignore. Miles decided to visit her home under the pretense of routine follow-up. Nancy greeted him with a polite smile, wearing her uniform even though she wasn't on shift. The house was immaculate. There were framed photos of Ethan everywhere on the mantel, by the bed, even beside the kitchen sink. Each picture showed her holding him close, smiling just enough to hide the exhaustion in her eyes. Miles scanned the living room, noting how clean it was, unnaturally so. A faint chemical smell lingered in the air, like hospital disinfectant. On a shelf, a child's drawing caught his attention. It showed a boy lying in bed with his mother standing beside him, holding what looked like a syringe. The words scrawled in a child's handwriting read, "Asterisk mommy makes me better." Asterisk that night, Miles couldn't stop thinking about the drawing. He went back to Ethan's file, this time comparing it with Nancy's work records. On the same nights Ethan had been hospitalized, Nancy had signed out doses of insulin and sedatives, medications she had no medical reason to use. It was only then that Miles began to see what others had missed. The perfect nurse, the grieving mother, the same woman who might have known exactly how to make a child sick and how to make it look like he had died naturally. Detective Miles knew he needed to move carefully. Nancy Holbrook wasn't just any suspect. She was a nurse, trained, intelligent, and trusted by everyone who knew her. A single wrong step could make her destroy evidence or vanish completely. He started quietly, requesting hospital inventory logs and surveillance footage without alerting her department. The first red flag appeared within days. Over the last year, Nancy had signed out insulin vials more than 40 times, despite not being assigned to any diabetic patients. The doses were small, barely noticeable, but the pattern was deliberate. When compared with the dates of Ethan's hospitalizations, the timing matched perfectly. Every unexplained seizure, every fainting episode, every night he struggled to breathe, all followed her shifts. Miles arranged to speak with her again, this time at the hospital. Nancy appeared calm, even gracious, as she led him through the ward. She spoke in a gentle voice, explaining her son's illness, how she had spent years fighting for him, how doctors never found answers. But when he mentioned insulin, a flicker of panic crossed her eyes so quick it almost went unnoticed. She brushed it off with professional composure, claiming she had borrowed the medication for a diabetic patient whose nurse was delayed. The explanation was logical, but something about the rehearsed tone made Miles doubt every word. Later that week, hospital security finally located archived footage from the pediatric ward. At 2:17 a.m. on the night Ethan died, the camera caught Nancy entering his room. She checked the monitors, looked around, then drew a syringe from her pocket and injected something into his Roman IV line. The footage was grainy, and her face was partly turned away, but the timestamp was undeniable. Ethan's heart monitor flatlined 20 minutes later. The entry in the medical log for that night showed nothing unusual. The dose she gave was never recorded. When Miles confronted her with the evidence, Nancy didn't cry or shout. She sat perfectly still, her voice steady. She said she had been administering vitamins to help him sleep. The more she spoke, the less human she seemed, cold, methodical, detached. Beneath her soft words was a darkness she couldn't quite hide. For the first time, Miles felt genuine dread. This wasn't negligence or desperation. It was something calculated, something far more terrifying than anyone in Willow Creek had imagined. The investigation into Nancy Holbrook's life uncovered horrors no one was prepared for. Behind the image of a devoted nurse and mother was a trail of deception that stretched back years. Detectives found that Nancy had meticulously built a life centered around sympathy. Every time Ethan fell ill, she posted emotional updates on social media, photos of him in hospital beds, stories about his bravery, and heartfelt messages about how she refused to give up. The posts drew hundreds of comments from friends and strangers offering love, prayers, and donations. People called her an inspiration. What they didn't realize was that she was writing those messages just hours after making Ethan sick herself. Investigators learned that her need for attention had begun long before Ethan's mysterious illnesses. Old coworkers described how she would exaggerate her own health problems to gain sympathy. She often talked about being overworked, underappreciated, and emotionally broken. It was as if she needed people to see her as both a victim and a hero. That need for validation grew into something far darker when she became a mother. Experts later called it a textbook case of Munchausen by proxy, a psychological disorder where a caregiver deliberately harms someone to gain admiration for saving them. Nancy's internet history painted an even more disturbing picture. She had searched for how to fake illness in children, how to induce seizures, and signs of slow poisoning. Most horrifying of all, a week before Ethan's death, she had searched how to cause cardiac arrest without leaving a trace. The motive was no longer just attention, it was control. Ethan's recovery had threatened the fragile identity Nancy had created. Without his sickness, she would no longer be seen as the selfless nurse, mother fighting against tragedy. To her twisted mind, his health was the real threat. When investigators questioned her colleagues, they recalled how Nancy had seemed restless in the weeks before Ethan's death. She was withdrawn, distracted, and constantly asking about medication dosages she didn't need. On the night he died, she had left work early, carrying a hospital bag home. Inside that bag were sedatives, syringes, and Insul, and items later found missing from the hospital supply. The pieces fit together with chilling precision. Nancy Holbrook hadn't just lost control, she had made a deliberate choice. She had decided that if Ethan couldn't stay sick, he wouldn't stay alive. The arrest of Nancy Holbrook happened quietly, almost eerily so. It was early morning when police cars rolled down Maple Street, their sirens off, the neighborhood still asleep. Nancy opened the door in her robe, expression calm, as if she had been expecting them. There was no fight, no shouting. She simply raised her hands and whispered, "I knew you'd come." The stillness of her voice unsettled every officer there. Inside her home, investigators found organized boxes labeled with Ethan's name, his baby clothes, his school drawings, his medical reports, and dozens of small glass vials tucked neatly inside a drawer. Each vial was labeled with dates that matched his hospital visits. It was as though she had kept trophies of her crimes. During interrogation, Nancy spoke softly, describing Ethan as her entire world. She insisted she had never meant to hurt him, that every injection was a way to keep him safe. Her words were coldly logical, detached from reality, but when Detective Miles pressed harder, asking why she never sought therapy or help, her demeanor changed. Her eyes turned empty, and she murmured something no one in the room understood at first. "He wasn't even mine." The silence that followed was suffocating. DNA testing confirmed the truth within days. Ethan Holbrook wasn't Nancy's biological child. The real Ethan had died hours after birth, and Nancy, who had suffered a miscarriage just weeks earlier, had secretly switched babies in the maternity ward. The child she took home belonged to another family, a couple who had believed their newborn had died due to sudden complications. The truth hit like a storm. The stolen child had lived 10 years under a false name, only to die at the hands of the woman who claimed to love him most. When the biological parents were found and told what had happened, they collapsed in disbelief. They had grieved their baby for a decade, never knowing he was alive all along. The revelation shattered the entire community. People who once praised Nancy as a hero now refused to even say her name. In court, she showed no remorse. She sat motionless as the verdict was read, life imprisonment without parole. Her final words before being led away were whispered and chilling, "He was mine the moment I held him." Detective Miles later admitted that those words haunted him more than the crime itself. In his nightmares, he still saw Ethan's drawing, the smiling mother with the syringe in her hand, and the words written underneath, "Mommy helps me feel better."